You probably haven't touched Stasis in a while since Strand came out and the other subclasses all got reworks. I was the same way, but after using this build, I'm having a hard time going back, and I think you will too, so let's take a look. Now this build is a very simple gameplay loop, so anyone can use it. You'll have infinite cold snap grenades with Osmiomancy Gloves, since they give you an extra grenade charge and more energy back on direct hits. And with our exotic weapon Wish Ender, you're going to be shattering those frozen enemies in one shot. Now starting with the subclass, Stasis. You're going to be running cold snap grenades as I mentioned before, and for aspects, you'll need ice flare bolts. This aspect says that when you shatter a frozen target, it spawns seekers that track and freeze other targets, so you'll be chaining this to all the enemies in a large area. You can also freeze the same enemy multiple times in a row, which makes this great for dealing with champions. The second aspect doesn't really matter as much. I like running Frost Pulse so I can freeze anything that's close to me when I use my Rift. And since I'm usually going to place my Rift when I'm low on health, this just guarantees that anything that's chasing me gets frozen instead. Your fragments are going to focus on enhancing your freezing abilities. The first fragment is Whisper of Fissures, which increases the damage and size of shattering a crystal or frozen target. And since you can chain the explosion from just breaking one frozen enemy, this applies to all of those explosions. Next, you want to use Whisper of Hedrons, which drastically increases weapon stability, aim assistance, airborne effectiveness, mobility, resilience, and recovery after you freeze an enemy with Stasis. Now, we really only care about the increase to recovery and resilience, since in endgame activities, those are a big help. And it gives you 60 resilience and 60 recovery, which is huge. So you really want to focus on maxing out your discipline with this build. That way you'll always have your grenade to freeze enemies, which means you should always have this active. Next fragment is Whisper of Refraction, which gives you class ability energy when you defeat a frozen or slowed target. So not only will you have an increase to your resilience and recovery the whole time, but you'll also get your Rift back very fast for extra healing and survivability. You get a different amount of energy back depending on the tier of enemy you kill, which I'll show on the screen here. And thankfully there are lots of high tier enemies in endgame content, so you'll be getting your Rift back quickly. And finally, the last fragment is Whisper of Rending, which makes your primary weapons do 50% more damage to frozen targets. And pairing this with our exotic weapon Wish Ender means you'll be tearing through elites and champions. Next, we're going to take a look at the mods you should run with this build. Starting with the helmet mods, you want to run Kinetic Siphon since you'll mostly be using Wish Ender to clear ads. We're running Heavy Ammo Finder as well so that you never run out of heavy. For arms, you want to run Grenade Kickstart to make sure that you can chain those grenades as fast as possible. Then I like to run Bolstering Detonation, so every time I freeze an enemy with my grenade, I get some Rift energy. And depending on how much energy you have left on your armor after that stat mod, you can run another Bolstering Detonation, although I almost always go for Fastball since I hate the throwing distance without it. For chest mods, as always, just match the outgoing damage burns with your resistance mods. There aren't many other useful mods on the chest armor besides Charged Up. For legs, you need Stacks on Stacks for double Charged with Light for each orb of power you pick up. After that, I like to run Absolution to help charge my abilities even more, and Recuperation to give me health whenever I pick up an orb. And finally, for class armor mods, I run Double Bomber for extra cooldown reduction on my grenades. Then I run Distribution on top of that since it helps recharge all my abilities, and running 3 bomber mods is useless. You don't actually receive a bonus to your grenade energy when you run 3 bomber mods versus running 2 of them. Moving on to the guns you want to run, as I mentioned before, Wish Ender is a big part of this build. It allows you to one-shot low-tier frozen enemies with Whisper of Rending, which then explodes for more damage due to Whisper of Fissures, which then triggers the Aspect Ice Flare Bolts to spread the freezing effect to more enemies, and then the cycle repeats. Now you can really start to see where the gameplay loop comes together. Now besides Wish Ender, you can really use whatever you want as long as you're able to deal with whatever champions you're facing. I prefer burst weapons with this build since it's easy to hit the enemies when they're frozen, things like rocket launchers, fusion rifles, or grenade launchers. And that's the build. It's pretty straightforward, you just have to throw your grenades as much as you can, and make sure you're shattering as many frozen targets as you can to chain those freezes. Please let me know if you have any questions or suggestions in the comments below. I'd love to see if anyone had any improvements to the build since it's already really strong, so anything that makes it better would be great. But that's all I got for you today. Have a great day, Guardians. Adios.